Welcome everybody to DynamicsCon. I am Rami Mounla. I'm a solution architect working for DXC in Wellington, New Zealand. And I am so excited to be part of this conference for the third time, 3 times in a row. Thank you very much for voting for my session. Today, we're going to be talking about Dynamics 365 DevOps regression. So this is, as I mentioned, third time that I'm here. And the topic has always been DevOps. That's the topic that you guys chose out of the other ones that I've submitted. And I'm so excited to actually take you on that journey on how you can improve from having something very minimal from a DevOps automation perspective with Dynamics 365 and the Power Platform to something more advanced. The other thing I want to mention is thank you very much for voting for all the women in the community to come and present at DynamicsCon. This year, I did not promote any of my material, but instead I chose to put all my votes and promote other women in tech and their sessions. And that paid off. We've got a great area of presenters, female presenters at DynamicsCon. They've got some great content. I really encourage you to go and have a look at what they're presenting. They've got a different perspective that most people like myself don't have in the IT community. So thank you very much for all of your votes. And let's get into the DevOps session. At any stage, if you have any questions, feel free to just add them into the chat. We'll be monitoring them and we'll be answering as we go. And at the end, you're also going to have heaps of time to ask questions if you want to take anything further. All right, so let's have a look at our agenda for today. So first of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about DevOps and myself. So what are the DevOps and, what's the expectation from a DevOps sort of capability or discipline, if you want, within the projects. I'll talk a little bit about my background and how I came to be into where I am right now. And also, we'll go through all the different disciplines that are included in DevOps. So what are the different things that we need to consider from a development perspective and from an operational perspective? I'll focus a little bit on Azure DevOps specifically. I think Azure and Dynamics 365 and the Power Platform are really nicely integrated with each other, and it's a great ecosystem to work with. So it's a sort of a natural solution to use Azure DevOps. However, you don't have to use Azure DevOps. You can use other tools as well. So it's up to you which one you want to use. And then finally, the focus of this year's session is going to be regression testing, specifically on the front end from the automated UI testing for model-driven apps as well as Canvas apps. So let's start with what is DevOps? So you probably have seen this diagram before, but that's something that I've presented in the past. So we've got this infinity loop that talks about dev and ops. So we basically have all the different disciplines that we go through from studying in the early stages of planning the work and then sort of doing the build, the code, the build, the testing. And then after that, we release, we deploy, and we finally operate and monitor. So this is sort of more on the monitoring side. So I usually don't focus too much on the operate side. That's why it's sort of grayed out. But I'll talk about all the different layers, if you want, of DevOps. But the main one that I'll be focusing on today is going to be testing. So the first time I presented at DynamicsCon, my DevOps session was voted, and I did a helicopter view about all the different things that you can do with DevOps. And between every season, when we do DynamicsCon, that content evolves with time. So the first one was helicopter view, and I had a what next? And the second session I did and I presented was using infrastructure as code, specifically using Terraform to build the Azure components that go with Dynamics 365. And then at the end of that session that I did earlier this year, I talked about what next, and it was around regression testing. So today I'm going to talk about regression testing. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll see what we'll talk about next time, hopefully, if I get voted. Once again, thank you for voting for my session. So if you want to get one thing out of this presentation, it's the same message that I've been giving over the different times I did my DevOps session. It's this. If you want to build a state-of-the-art DevOps pipeline, start with baby steps. This is very important to note that it's a journey. It's something that you do in small chunks and then you will get the full end-to-end picture. And that's exactly how I've been presenting my DevOps sessions over the last 3 sessions that I did at DynamicsCon. I started with a helicopter view, telling you what is the art of possible. And then in each session, I was focusing on a new capability. Last time it was infrastructure as code with Terraform. Today is going to be regression testing, specifically on the UI side. Next time, we'll see what it's going to be about. So let me introduce myself, talk a little bit about myself. So I am Rami Mounla. I am from Wellington, New Zealand. Wellington is the political capital of New Zealand. So we basically are surrounded with public sector customers, and most of my customers are in the public sector. And DevSecOps is a big thing in there, and we basically have to use pipelines. We have to manage our work using either Azure DevOps or Jira or any other tool. So there's a mandate by the customer that we have to be using those standards. And that sort of feeds into my career, into building that capability and enhancing it over time. So I am currently a solution architect at DXC Technology, so the New Zealand branch. And I also do a lot of community work around. So I am the leader of the Wellington Power Platform user group. So we run monthly sessions and we get the community together. I also run yearly conferences in New Zealand just to preach, if you want, some of the capabilities of Dynamics 365 and the Power Platform. A few years ago, I wrote a book called the Microsoft Dynamics 365 Extensions Cookbook. It's probably a little bit getting out to date right now, and it's time to sort of release a newer version, maybe more focused on the Power Platform. But there's a whole chapter dedicated on DevOps in that book that you might find quite interesting. One thing I would also like to add is that I am TOGAF certified. Usually people don't brag about being TOGAF certified. It's quite a boring sort of certification in some people's minds. It's focused more on enterprise architecture, which is more around aligning the business with sort of the solutions, their needs, and the technology that is available within a large organization. But the reason I mentioned that is because they've got something called a maturity model. A TOGAF maturity model might look something like that, where you've got a discipline that you're looking into. So, for example, business transformation readiness assessment, and you've got sort of the categories on how well you are placed in your organization, how mature you are in that specific discipline. So from something that is not defined or something that is ad hoc, something that is repeatable, all the way to something that is optimized, which means this discipline drives the rest of the organization. So I really liked that model, and I decided to build something similar, a maturity model for Dynamics 365. So what I basically did was come up with the levels. So we've got something that is not defined, something that is ad hoc, something that is defined, and something that is optimized. And then on the left-hand side, specifically related to DevOps, we've got all the different disciplines, if you want, that are listed in there. And I built a matrix based on that, defining what are those levels and where are you. So you can, based on your organization's maturity, you can have a look at the descriptions and go, all right, well, I believe we are somewhere in there, and you can do it per discipline. So for example, if it comes to deployments, let's say, you can say, all right, we do our deployments manually, which means that, there's no automation, there's nothing in there. So we are at level 0, there's nothing defined. However, if individual sort of consultants have their own scripts to do the deployments and they run it from their machines, then it's a little bit ad hoc. So people do it, on demand if you want. But then the next step is if you've got those scripts stored within Azure DevOps and it's driven by a pipeline, then definitely at that stage, it's going to be something that is defined. And finally, if it's optimized, that means that you've got very strong capabilities. I talked in my last session about infrastructure as code. So that would include building the whole environments from scratch. It's really optimized. And this is the way the rest of the organization does their deployment, because we're quite mature in that space. So that gives you sort of the matrix of what are the different bits. Today, specifically, we're going to be talking about testing. So again, if you're in the sort of not defined stage, then you probably don't have any automated testing. Everything is done manually, and it's done by the individuals as the tasks are assigned to them. Maybe something a little bit ad hoc is developers running unit tests on their own machines, before they do the builds, or just to ensure that everything is working fine. But there's no sort of well-defined process behind it and automation. So again, that takes us to the next step, where it's integrated within your pipeline with Azure DevOps. So every time you check in your code or you change a solution, then you've got some changes happening in there, and then the regression runs and then ensures that you've got the right information in there and that nothing has broken. And finally, we get to the optimized stage, where you monitor code coverage. You've got regression tests that is doing back-end, front-end, business logic, so the whole suite of tests that you run, and then you get some comprehensive reports that then go back to the developers and so on. So that gives us like a good idea. Obviously, I'm not going to go through all the different disciplines, but typically speaking, the target in the industry is to be at the defined stage. Going to the optimized stage is probably going to be a little bit too costly, and you're not going to get the benefits that you need unless you see a good reason to go in there. All right, so let's quickly go through the different disciplines. And then, as I said, we're going to be focusing more on the UI testing today. So going back to our wheel that we've got in there. So the planning phase is when you start working on whatever you've got in to build in the project. So during that phase, you look at your backlog, you build your backlog. So those are all your user stories, your epics, your hierarchy of work items. And then you identify what is a fit, so what can be done out of the box with your solution, but also what is the gap, what has to be built in terms of customization. If you're using the Agile sort of template in Azure DevOps, or ADO as we call it, then it's going to have that hierarchy. We've got an epic might have some features, and a feature would have user stories and tasks. And then those are assigned to the users. So tasks or user stories can be assigned to users, and they get progressed as things happen. And then you've got bugs and issues as well associated with them. You would also have a nice representation, and you've got what you see at the top left corner, a burn down chart or burn up chart. So basically just tracking how you're progressing in terms of work management, if you're actually closing those within the sprint that you're running, and so on. So that is the first sort of planning phase of creating all the work items and making sure that everything is accountable for. The next part is the coding part. So in there, it's important to follow some best practices, and I'll quickly talk about a few. So the first one would be making sure that your solutions or the code that you're writing is layered. So make sure you've got an entry point. For example, if you're writing a plugin, you've got a place to enter it. You've got the business logic as a separate layer. You've got the data access layer as a layer in the back. So make sure that all of that is following, best practices, coding practices. A lot of the examples that you might see online might be straight to the point, just showing you exactly how things needs to be done. But it doesn't mean that it's necessarily following best practice. So use your judgment, your expertise as a developer to see what is the best way of actually doing that. So the next part is doing a little bit of unit testing. So make sure that and the business logic at least is unit tested. You can do it on the your code, your C# code, your .NET code, and even on the JavaScript side. So there are techniques to do it. I've talked about those in my books, if you're interested. But also if you want to mock some of the bits, so you don't want to connect always to Dynamics 365, then there's a few mocking frameworks that are available out there. Fake XRM Easy is a really good one that I've been using as well. So yeah, just have a look at them. They're quite useful. And then as your solution gets more and more complex, focus as much as you can, try to do things out of the box with configuration. That will save you a lot of headache and then overhead as well. So it was going to be a little bit more streamlined, if you want, in terms of delivery. However, don't be shy of writing code. I am a developer by trade, so I started as a developer in my career, and I sometimes I think that writing something in Power Automate might be a little bit too complex, and you can write it in 2 lines of code in C#, and it's easy and maintainable. Having something that is quite complex in Power Automate can be difficult to maintain, especially as you start breaking it into different sort of sub routines. And from that perspective, especially on the coding side, think about how you turn your customization, your code, into a framework that can be configured by inputting data coming from Dynamics 365. So, for example, as an example, you can use a business rules engine, for example. You can extract that into a separate component that is available out there, third party, an ISV, whatever it is, or you can actually build that logic at once in your solution. It can be your IP if you want, and you can feed that with information configuration coming from Dynamics 365. And that then becomes configurable rather than customizable. So you customize it once, you build the framework, you install it as a managed solution into your product, and then all the rest becomes data that is fed into it, and then you can use it moving forward. So those are just ideas when it comes to coding. But again, keep a good balance between configuration and customization and out of the box and extensions. Cool, so now that we've done the coding part, we're going to build it. So when it builds, basically it takes all the information that you've got and then maybe sends it into a build server. And I always say it's very important to run your static analysis at this stage. Static analysis gives you feedback for free. And there are lots of tools that can do it for you. Maybe some of them come with a premium, some of them are free. But things like ReSharper or SonarQube or Parasoft, all of those will save you an immense amount of time by just automatically running a set of rules on your code and giving you feedback on whether you've done an anti-pattern or whether you've done something wrong, a security leak, or something that might not follow the convention that you put into it in the rules. So it gives you that free feedback. And you basically don't need to get anybody to, well, it is good practice to still do a peer review, but it saves you a lot of time from a peer reviewing perspective. Now, this is all about code, but if you've got a solution that is mainly done in configuration, there are not many tools that are available out there that can give you that feedback, but there is one that is very important, and that's the solution checker provided by Microsoft. And the good thing is that you can actually call that one programmatically within your pipeline. So every time my solution is ready to be moved, let's say into a QA environment, I can trigger my pipeline. That pipeline will automatically extract the solution from development environment, make sure that it's a managed solution, put it into my source control, run the solution checker on it, and then give me some feedback on whether I've done something good or bad. And it can give it to you at different levels, and then you can deal with it this way. Cool. So the core of our presentation today is going to be the testing side of things. So in the test, we're going to have a look at how we're going to do automated UI testing for Canvas apps as well as for model-driven apps. So I've got that little video in here just showing the EasyRepro. I am going to be running an EasyRepro demo as well. And it's really straightforward. Basically, you just get the latest, you clone the latest from the GitHub repository. You configure it by adding the username and password to access that specific instance, and also the URL to your instance. And once you've got that, then it's basically just a matter of running it, and it's going to show you all the different bits that it's doing with the interface, as you can see in the video in there. So in here, it's just creating a new account. It's giving it an account name, a phone number, and a website, and it's saving that record, and then it's storing the results back into the list, and then giving you the green tick that this test has passed. This is integrated within Visual Studio, so it's using Selenium in the back end. But EasyRepro is basically a layer created by Microsoft on top of Selenium. Selenium is an automated automation framework used for UI testing on web browsers, so Chrome, Firefox, IE, and so on, Edge. So it's quite a mature tool, and EasyRepro has gone a long way since the early days when I was talking about it. So it's quite comprehensive. It covers a lot of the things that you can do when you point and click. So it's good to actually just write a few lines of code to actually simulate what a person would do. It's also interesting to see the difference between how this is working and how the automation for Canvas app is going to work. So we'll go under the hood and then we'll have a look at that. All right, so let's quickly have a look at a few things that we can do from a testing perspective. So we talked about unit testing with Fix XRM Easy, for example. Now for model-driven, we just talked about EasyRepro and using sort of the Selenium framework as the foundation, or library as the foundation, and then gives you that UI testing for model-driven apps, which are basically browser-driven. Canvas apps, we know them, we love them. They're basically pixel perfect, slightly different from model-driven apps, although the two are starting to merge, and we can see a lot of the things that are coming in between those two platforms, which is fantastic. It's a great effort by Microsoft to see, some of the formulas that we are used to in Power Automate or Canvas apps that are now, so Power FX specifically that I'm talking about, that are coming to model-driven apps, but also some of the model-driven templates that we've gotten there that are also sort of finding their way into Canvas apps. Great collaboration between those two UIs and great convergence between the two. So Canvas app specifically has something called the Test Studio, so the Power Apps Test Studio. We will be doing a demo on that and having a look at how it's actually running. The good thing about Canvas apps and all the components in Canvas apps is that they are built from the ground up to be unit tested. Whereas with model-driven, given that it's pure HTML, it's sort of an afterthought and that's the problem with all sort of HTML testing, if you want, is that it's sort of an afterthought where you need a framework to go and find the elements that you've got in there, and then you need to tell the element to do something with that item. Whereas with Canvas app, you're sort of using the APIs, the platform APIs, to actually do your testing. And it's really interesting. So we'll have a look at that under the hood. And then finally, your build environment, you can use Power Apps and the build tools to actually make sure that all of the environments are set up, and then you can run your testing on it. Again, there's another slide later in this presentation that I talk about the end-to-end process. All right, so right now what we're going to do is talk about the Power Platform UI testing, model-driven, as well as Canvas apps. We're going to get our hands dirty and have a look at the things under the hood. Okay, so what we've got in here is Visual Studio, where I have cloned the EasyRepro repository that is available in GitHub at Microsoft. So you can fork it, you can take a copy of it and then clone it in your own environment. And then you can make a few changes to it and then give it a spin, give it a test. You will notice the structure in here that we've got. So we've got sort of the API, the unified interface, which is now the only interface available, sort of the browser, which is more around sort of the capability of the browser, and then some samples. So we'll be focusing more on the sample side of things. And all I did to start this, as I said, I cloned it. I went to the app.config. I added the username, the password, and the URL to my environment, and that's it. And I went into some of the samples. So we've got one here called Create Account. So it's under the UCI Create. Here you go. It's that one in here, Create Account, under the UCI and the Create folder. And it has a very simple test that is going to sort of start the browser and then navigate somewhere, create a new account, give it a random name, and then click on the save and pass the test. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this test. So it's going to open a browser. I might have to bring it into this screen. Yep, here it is. And it does all of that automatically. So as you can see, it was just like 5 lines of code. And within those 5 lines of code, it knows how to deal with the platform. And that's the beauty of the EasyRepro capability. So it understands Dynamics 365. It understands the ecosystem, and it knows what are the typical things that are done. So for example, when I log in, I need to put in my username and password. There's even an option to actually address multi-factor authentication if you want. It then actually knows that there are tiles and it needs to click on the Sales Hub because we've told it we need to navigate to the Sales Hub. It knows that there's a left navigation, that it needs to click on the list of accounts. So it's done that right now. And then in here, it's going to go and find the new button that is available in the ribbon at the top, and it's going to click on it. That might take a little bit of time. And then once that is clicked, then it's going to open the record and then start typing the information in it. All right, so now it clicked on the new button. It's looking for the account name. It's typing some random information. It's saving the record. It had a validation sort of warning, and now it's all passed. So the validation was addressed once something was typed in there, and then the save button was clicked, and the test has passed. So we've got the green tick in there. So as you can see, it's everything is sort of available as a library or as something that you can call. Like I want to log in using those credentials. I want to open the app called Sales. I want to open a sub area. I want to click on New. I want to set a value on a specific field called name, and I want to save the record. So very sort of API driven or sort of EasyRepro driven. Now, I just ran that on my local machine. You can do the exact same thing on Azure and an Azure DevOps pipeline, and you can run it in there. So the next bit I'm going to show you is building a simple Canvas app, and then how we can automatically run the test for that one. So I am in the make.preview.powerapps. Make.powerapps.com works as well, so that's all good. And in there, I've got a very simple application that I've set up. So let me select the right environment, NZ32, click on Apps. I've got a Canvas app that I've created in there. So if I click on Edit, it's going to take me to that page in here. Very simple app. It's not even connected to a data source. I'm going to run it. All it does is display a value, B, and it can take two inputs and then select the total or calculate the total between those two. So, you can change the values and get the total in there. And if I hide display B, then it actually removes it, clears the value, and then it only gets the value from value A. If I add that, then this appears again, and I can add a value in there. So very simple calculator, A plus B, and then gets you the total with the option of removing the B value. All right, so in order to test a Canvas app, on the left-hand side in your Power App Studio, you've got this test capability. So let's click on that and have a look at what's going to happen. So I've already prepared the test. You can actually click on the record button and then do the recording of what you want to do, like type in a value, select a checkbox, and so on. And when you do that, it's actually going to populate all of those lines in here. And as you can see, it's not using an HTML capability, but it's using the Canvas app APIs to set the value, to do an assert, and then to do a check. So for example, in here, total value.text equals 3. This is an assert ensuring that if I put set property of value text to 1 and set property of value text B to 2, then the total is going to be 3. So it's all sort of Canvas app PowerFX driven. Gives you that capability. Once you've got it ready, then you can click on play. It will ask you to publish. That may take maybe 10 seconds to do that. That's probably the longest part of the of running a test, is actually publishing every time you make a change. But here we go. It's going to run the initial information at the start. I don't have anything specific. It's going to check. It's going to add value 1, value 2. It's going to assert that the total is 3. It's going to remove the checkbox, and then it's going to assert that the final value is back to 1. And it's correct. And it gives you the tick boxes on all of that. Now, what's happening with the results? That was very visual. We could see that it's successful. But then one thing that was happening is that when my test was complete, I'm calling a patch method. That patch method is actually creating an object called test result and pushing it into a test result custom table that I've created in Dynamics 365 or in the Power Platform. And it's actually giving it the name of the test case and it's checking if it's passed. If it's successful, then set it as passed, otherwise set it as failed. And you've got those test case result. This object actually can be queried, right? So we can have a look at that. So let me see if I can put it in here. That added some additional information that I didn't need. All right, it's not displaying in here, but I probably need to add another value, so I'll do it right there. So as you can see, if I click on the dot notation, it's giving me the autocomplete, and we had the test suite name, the test suite ID, the description, the case name, and so on. So you can just select whatever information you want from the start time, the end time, and so on, and then push that information into a repository that you can then report on. So we had in here I'll just undo that, and then we'll get it back to the test case name. So what does that look like? So as I said, it's a custom table that I've created. So if I go into my environment and I go into tables, I can search to test results. The prefix tells you that it's actually a custom one, and I can go and have a look at the data. And we've just run it. It's 8:18 where I am right now, and that test was successful. And if we look at the right results, so let's see if we can open that record, or actually just have a look at the view active results. And hopefully that will give us the information that we need. And it will tell us that whether the test has passed or whether the test has failed. So let's add the column, and let's get the result one. I probably didn't save my previous query, but here you go. The test has passed, and we know that it happened at 8:18. Right, so now that we've run it manually, how do we actually run that through a pipeline? Well, there is a Microsoft GitHub repository that actually talks about how you can do that and gives you the sample code to do it. So what I'm going to do is switch back to my Azure DevOps. I've forked that repository, so it's called Power Apps Test Automation. Microsoft, so it's forked from Microsoft / Power Apps Test Automation. I've forked it into my own personal repository. All I had to do was just go into that testurl.json. I've created that, and I've given it that URL in here. Where do you get that URL? It's available in your test, so you can copy, play link. If I do that, it's asking me to publish. I'm not going to do that, but it actually generates a URL, and that URL is going to have your tenancy ID, your environment ID, and then your test case ID. So you put all of this information in it, and then you save it. And then when you run your test pipeline, you just need to make sure that it's actually calling this solution and it's doing the work. So all it is a Visual Studio solution. It's a unit test solution similar to what we've seen in EasyRepro. And in fact, if you look at the code under the hood, which I actually got open in here, it's going to look very familiar, right? So we saw this API, we saw this browser, we saw those tests and the samples. That is following the exact same structure that we had in EasyRepro, but it's specific for Canvas apps. Right, what does the pipeline look like? I've created that pipeline already. And don't worry about it. There's lots of documentation available out there that will tell you how to do it. I'm going to click on Edit. 4 steps. The first one is making sure that you've got an agent that runs sort of front-end testing. You set the resolution using a PowerShell script. The second one is to get your solution. So I'm using a restore NuGet package. It's just the same as getting your solution. The third one is to build your solution. This is just a normal build. And the last one is to run the unit test. So again, all of those are out-of-the-box actions that you can use with the classic pipeline interface. So you can tell it to go find the DLL that you want to run and pass it some parameters. So those are the overriding the default parameters. I'm saying the username, the password, the URL, and so on are all available in there. Those are coming from this place right here, variables. I'm not going to click on it, but if you click in there, then you just need to make sure that whatever variables you're referencing are actually available in that variable store. You can use, if you're concerned about security, Although the variables do have a way to mask passwords, you can use Azure Key Vault as well, just to retrieve that information and feed it into your pipeline. I can run the pipeline. It's not going to be overly exciting. All you're going to see is basically a bunch of steps that are going to run with tick boxes next to them. The important one is that when your unit test runs, then you would, at the end of it, it's going to hang for a while as it's actually running that, and then it's going to give you a pass or a fail for the test that you've run. Now, remember, we did include another post-test step that does a patch back to the test results, which means that every time you run your pipeline, it's going to go and put the results into that table, so you can do some reporting on it if you need specific details about the errors that happen and what caused the failure. But at the same time, if the test fails, then you're going to get feedback in your pipeline, and then you can treat it separately as well. So hopefully that gives you a good sort of overview of the sort of capabilities from a model-driven perspective, testing perspective, but also from a Canvas app perspective, testing perspective, and how you can incorporate that into your Azure pipeline and then run it on an ongoing basis just to make sure that everything is running as expected. All right, so we had a look at sort of the Power Platform and Dynamics 365 UI testing from a model-driven perspective as well as from a Canvas perspective. Let's now move on to the next bit, where we're doing a release and deployments. In that case, you've got the Power Platform build tools, and there's quite a few categories of them. There's the helper tools that get everything installed, the quality checker, which is the solution checker that we talked previously about. There is the solution import, export, and package capabilities. And finally, there's the environment creation capabilities. So that was the topic of my last session. Feel free to go back and watch it on demand. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask them right now, be it from last session or whether on the presentation that I did on the unit test today. But the idea behind it is that you'll have an environment. You'll create some unit tests on it. It could be automated UI unit test. You're going to push this data into a new environment. Potentially, you can get the values from GitHub. You can validate that everything is okay. And then you can create automatically a test environment, an overnight environment, deploy the changes onto them, and then run your regression test, which we talked about in this presentation. The last bit, part of the infinity loop, is the monitoring. So out of the box, you have Dataverse monitoring. So this is part of your administration portal for the Power Platform. You can go in there and get tons of information about what's happening. But there's also the Center of Excellence, which actually helps you get more information about usability, policy breaches. So if the DLP is being breached, people using automation and it's becoming popular, but they're not following best practices, and so on. So the Center of Excellence is a great topic to cover. Unfortunately, I don't have time to talk about it today. But yeah, the monitoring is another big thing. And you can also use things like, Power Apps, PowerShell, Power Automate to retrieve information and surface it back to the administrators to understand what's happening under the hood. So what is DevOps? So we talked about sort of all the different parts, starting from the planning side, the coding, the building, the testing. We focused a lot on testing in this session, and then release, deploy, and finally operate and monitor. And again, monitoring, I probably skimmed on it. So maybe if you guys are still keen for me to present in the next season, then maybe you can sort of get me involved and we can sort of have a look at covering a session on monitoring, or specifically around the Center of Excellence. I think that deserves a topic by itself, and that can be something that I'll be presenting at the next DynamicsCon if you guys are still keen to vote for me. A few resources before I sort of close my presentation. There's some comprehensive documentation at Microsoft, at the docs.microsoft.com, that talks about Canvas App Test Studio, so the automation platform that I use today, and how to include that within a pipeline. And that can be done using a classic pipeline if you're more familiar with the interface, or using a YAML code pipeline. The recommendation is to use YAML. I didn't show it today just for the simplicity of things, but it does have a lot of advantages in there. If you're keen to connect with me, I'm on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and I've got my YouTube channel that I sort of update on a fairly regular sort of pace. Any events that are happening within New Zealand are covered in there. But DynamicsCon is a great location for tons of information. There's lots of great presenters. Feel free to have a look at the on-demand sessions and also to attend some of the sessions of the ones that are presenting live during this event. All the code that I covered today is available on GitHub, so feel free to go and have a look at the ones that are in there. I've got my own one, the Microsoft one, the EasyRepro, and the Power Apps Stats Studio. And that's it for me. Thank you very much for attending. Thank you very much for voting for my session today. If you have any questions, I'll be available to answer those. Please feel free to use the chat and to share your thoughts. And with that, I'm ending the session. Thank you very much. I'm Rami, and see you next time. Hey guys, we are live with the Q&A. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask them. Jim, thank you very much for attending. And yeah, it's definitely an area that needs a lot of expansion on. It's relatively new. And yeah, if you need any support, just let me know, hit me up. Mauricio, same thing. Thank you very much for the thumbs up. And yeah, if you guys have any questions, feel free to add them into the chat. In the meantime, I do have a few typical questions that are being asked in a lot of sessions that I do around regression testing and DevOps in general. But for regression specifically, a lot of people ask me whether it's a reliable method and whether it does have its quirks. Based on experience, yes, it does have some quirks. So with any UI automation capability, you'll have a few issues here and there. Part of it might be related to the resolution of the screen, the environment that you're running in. But there are a few things that you can do to address those. The first one is, as you saw in the scripts that I was writing, is to have a set resolution and make sure it's a resolution that is standardized, as opposed to a smaller screen or larger screen where things might fail. This especially is an issue when you're doing model-driven testing with EasyRepro. Make sure that you've got consistency in the environment that you're running your test on so that you've got consistent results. And one thing that we do quite often is introduce pauses from time to time, just to make sure that it's, if it needs to wait for a little bit of time, then it doesn't actually fail the test because the element has not loaded on the screen. So those are some of the hints and tips that you can do for model-driven apps. If you find any issues with EasyRepro itself, do remember that it's open source. And I've seen a lot of MVPs and people from the public in the past go and address a specific issue by fixing it in the code itself and doing a pull request back to Microsoft. Microsoft will have a look at the code and then they'll go and fix it. This becomes especially the case when new features are introduced. I remember when model screens were introduced, where you can basically have the left navigation, or you can have a pop-up screen in the middle of your model-driven apps that was not supported correctly, or there was a bit of confusion between the elements on the front and on the back. And I actually fixed the EasyRepro library to do that, and it was working fine. So don't be afraid to go and fix it, and then go and have a look at whether there are better ways of actually doing it. From a Canvas apps perspective, I also noticed that, yes, it's fantastic. I love the usage of PowerFX. As I said, it's actually built from the ground up to be unit tested and to be regression tested. And that helps a lot from a recording perspective, and also from adding all those different steps that you want to execute. But it's an area that is still emerging. So there's still quite a lot to be done in that space, especially when we are talking about for example, a screen where you've got an image on it and you want to click on a specific location as opposed to click a button, but you've got, a specific pixel that you want to reach. And, especially with Canvas app being pixel perfect, and it's an environment that can be used for a lot of different use cases. So this is something that is still coming in the framework, in terms of flexibility of what you can test, as opposed to only what you can get with the PowerFX capabilities and the out-of-the-box scripting, if you want, of the test studio.
But it's an emerging area, and the fact that we do get tools like the Test Studio to go and help us regression test our Canvas apps and our capabilities is a great step forward. And as I mentioned, like if we're comparing the .NET world and the bespoke web world, we've got tons and tons of tools that can help us in that space from a testing perspective, from a static analysis perspective, that will give you quality details back, and then that will help you then make the right decisions on whether you've got quality code or whether there's something to be improved. A very good example was recently I've been working on a project where we were discussing cyclometric complexity in Visual Studio and in C# code. And it's native to the platform where you can go and have a look at it. It will tell you that your loops are a little bit too big. You've got lots of if-else conditioning or nested conditions and so on. And it will come up with a score telling you that your cyclometric complexity is too high. But we haven't seen anything like that in the Power Platform, in specifically Power Automate, for example, where you might have all those nested loops that might turn your Power Automate a little bit too large, too big, and difficult to maintain, but you have no feedback or static analysis tools to give you that feedback and to tell you that maybe this is something that you need to do in a slightly better way. But baby steps. This is something that is coming in the platform and is maturing over time and is becoming the norm moving forward. So as I mentioned in my recommendation, you've got the maturity metrics. Depending on the type of project that you're working on, you don't have to gold plate everything up front. So think about the value that you're going to get out of your DevOps automation, be it from a static analysis perspective, from a regression testing perspective, even from a deploying perspective. There's, depending on how complex your project is, how many people are working on that project, they may be or may not be value in actually venturing and doing all of that. There's tons of information available out there. Microsoft actually has a starter kit, not necessarily the COE starter kit, but a DevOps pipeline starter kit that will help you move your code, your solutions from one environment to the other, and how to sort of manage that with different branches in Azure DevOps or in your Git repository. They have examples on how to do it. They even provide you with a Canvas app as the user interface that will allow you to go and extract your solution from an environment, put it into the Git environment, do a pull request, and then push it back in, and potentially promote it into other environments. Do have a look at it. It's actually quite a nice little tool out there. And again, it's the starter kit. If you want to use it in a different way, then by all means do consider looking at alternatives or actually updating that sort of out-of-the-box capability into something that is a little bit more suitable or tailored for the project that you are working on. So as I mentioned, feel free to get in touch with me if there is a specific topic you want to discuss, or if you think that monitoring or the Center of Excellence is a good topic for next season. I'll definitely be putting those topics forward for a nomination, but if you're keen, just let me know. Get in touch with me on LinkedIn or Twitter or any other platform. Thank you, Molly. Thank you, everybody, for attending the session. And thank you, DynamicsCon, for organizing this and getting me here for the third time. So looking forward to something. Cheers.